We glamorize the cowboy on open plains, but America's first cattle story began in a sweltering green labyrinth where only the ruthless survived. Left behind by conquistadors like Ponce de Leon, these Iberian cows endured hurricanes, screwworms, and panthers without human help or a dime spent on veterinarians. What transformed this forgotten breed into nature's zero-cost survival machine? The answer upends everything you think you know about cattle in America. In 1521, 7 Andalusian cattle stepped off a Spanish ship and onto the wild, mosquito-choked shoreline of what is now southwestern Florida. This landing, led by Juan Ponce de Leon, set loose bloodlines that would shape the American South for centuries. The animals were not the hulking, placid cows familiar today, but wiry, sure-footed beasts bred in the rugged hills of Spain. Their ancestors, the Retinta and Berenda, had survived Moorish wars and Iberian droughts. Now, they faced a new world of tangled cypress, hidden alligators, and relentless heat. 18 years later, Hernando de Soto's expedition followed, bringing more Spanish cattle from Cuba and Hispaniola, each voyage adding to a tiny, precious pool of livestock. Ship manifests and DNA markers confirm these early imports. Fewer than 300 head in total reached the continent in the 1st century after Columbus. Most of these cattle vanished into the forests and swamps, abandoned as Spanish settlements failed or moved on. Yet the genes endured. Modern genetic studies trace the Piney Woods cow's lineage back to these Iberian ancestors, revealing markers that set them apart from British and Northern European breeds. As one geneticist explains, their DNA carries signatures of adaptation to both Mediterranean and tropical climates, an inheritance that would soon be tested by everything the American wilderness could throw at them. The story of the Piney Woods begins not with a ranch, but with a handful of cattle left to fend for themselves in a land that was as hostile as it was green. For nearly 2 centuries, the Piney Woods cattle were left alone in a world that seemed determined to erase them. There were no fences, no ranchers, no hands to mend wounds or deliver feed. Survival depended on instincts honed over generations. Hurricanes swept across the Gulf, flattening forests and drowning the unwary. Panthers and red wolves stalked the shadows, picking off the slow or careless. The most relentless killer was smaller than a thumb, the screwworm. This parasite, the larva of a fly, would infest even the tiniest cut, eating living flesh and leaving most cattle to die from infection. Every year, only the most vigilant mothers and the quickest calves survived the gauntlet. The herd thinned, but those that remained grew sharper, more agile, and fiercely protective. Their bodies adapted too. Smaller frames shed heat in the sweltering humidity, and hooves hardened against swamp mud. Over time, these cattle learned to slip through palmetto thickets like deer, vanishing at the first scent of danger. Without human selection, nature alone decided which traits would endure. By the late 1700s, the Piney Woods breed had become a living archive of survival, marked by intelligence, nimbleness, and a resistance to parasites that would baffle modern veterinarians. Every animal alive was proof that only the toughest could make it through the green hell, year after year, with nothing but their own wits and the land beneath their feet. By the dawn of the 1800s, the Piney Woods cattle had become ghosts of the southern forests, half wild, impossible to corner, and worth their weight in silver to anyone who could catch them. Settlers who called themselves Florida Crackers did not manage herds in the way of Western ranchers. They hunted cattle like game. The tools of their trade were as distinctive as the land itself. A cracker's whip, often 12 feet of tightly braided cowhide, cracked like a rifle shot through the palmetto scrub. That sound was not just for show. It flushed cattle out of the brush, sending them darting into the open where they could be seen, counted, and sometimes, if luck held, caught. But a whip alone could not hold a Piney Woods cow. For that, crackers relied on catch dogs, lean and smart, bred for generations to chase and grab. The best catch dogs would sprint after a running cow, leap, and clamp onto her nose, holding fast until the cracker could get a rope around her horns or brand her. Branding was the only mark of ownership. There were no fences, no barns, and no feed troughs. Once branded, calves were turned back into the woods to fend for themselves. A year later, the hunters returned to see what had survived. This was the closest thing to free money the southern frontier offered. The cows needed nothing from their owners. No hay in winter, no corn in drought, no medicine for parasites. If a cow made it through the year, she would likely have a calf by her side. That calf, if it survived panthers and screwworms, could be rounded up and sold for cash. For poor families, this was often the only real income they saw. Records from the early 1800s show some crackers running hundreds of head, each one branded and left to the mercy of the swamps. The system worked because the cows themselves had become as tough and elusive as the land demanded. Every successful roundup was a testament to the skills of the hunter, the intelligence of the dog, and the raw survival instincts of the piney woods cow. In the summer of 1863, the Mississippi River split the Confederacy in two. Union gunboats patrolled the water, choking off the cattle drives from Texas that once fed Southern armies. Official records show that by the time Vicksburg fell, the Deep South was cut off from its main source of beef. Quartermaster diaries from Alabama and Mississippi begin to mention a desperate reliance on whatever livestock could be found nearby. In these entries, one phrase appears over and over: native cattle from the swamps. These were not the well-fed herds of the old plantations. They were piney woods cattle, half wild, nearly invisible, scattered through the tangled forests and marshes. While Union foragers swept through fields and raided barns, these animals slipped deeper into the wetlands, out of reach and out of sight. Local families, already accustomed to the yearly ritual of hunting their own cattle, now found their survival tied to the same skill. The woods became a larder, hidden in plain sight. Meat, milk, and even draft oxen for hauling supplies all came from these elusive herds. A Civil War historian points to accounts from Confederate officers who wrote about the difficulty of feeding troops in the face of blockades and burned fields. In some counties, piney woods cattle made the difference between starvation and endurance. They were not counted in official tallies, but their presence is felt in the gaps, where soldiers kept fighting and where civilians held on just a little longer. The breed's ability to vanish into the brush meant they survived when other livestock were rounded up or slaughtered. In the end, these cattle did not win battles, but they helped keep the South from collapse during its leanest years. Their story is written not in grand victories, but in the quiet persistence of families who found enough to eat, year after year, in the green shadows of the swamps. A piney woods cow stands half the height of an Angus, but every inch of her is built for survival. Adult cows tip the scale at just 600 to 800 pounds, with the largest bulls rarely exceeding 900 pounds. This compact frame is no accident. In the Deep South, where summer heat hangs heavy and humidity never lets up, a smaller body loses heat faster. The surface area to mass ratio matters. Less bulk means more skin exposed to the air, allowing these cattle to shed heat quickly, even when the air feels like a wet blanket. Where a 1,200-pound feedlot steer will pant and seek shade by mid-morning, piney woods cattle graze through the hottest part of the day, unfazed by temperatures that leave other breeds struggling. The advantages run deeper than size. Piney woods' hooves are narrow, hard, and sharply pointed, more like a goat's than a modern beef cow's. In the mud and standing water of pine flat woods, most cattle are vulnerable to foot rot, a bacterial infection that can cripple a herd. But the tough, compact hooves of the piney woods resist softening and splitting. Historical accounts from 19th century farmers describe these cattle moving easily through boggy ground, picking their way over roots and cypress knees with the sure-footedness of deer. Even today, ranchers note that piney woods rarely need trimming or treatment, a sharp contrast to the regular hoof care required for commercial breeds. Diet, too, sets them apart. Piney woods are browsers rather than typical grazers. Their ancestors survived centuries in forests where grass was scarce and competition was fierce. Instead of relying on pasture, they eat what the woods offer: pine needles, leaves, acorns, greenbrier, even Spanish moss. A piney woods cow will reach up to strip bark from low branches or nibble the tips of palmetto fronds. Studies of their foraging habits show that more than half of their diet can come from plants modern cattle ignore or even reject. This ability to turn trash into protein means piney woods can thrive on land that would starve other breeds. Poor sandy soils, overgrown timber tracts, and hurricane-damaged scrub become productive when these cattle are at work. For small farmers, the implications are enormous. With a herd of piney woods, there is no need to buy hay, grain, or mineral supplements. The cows find their own food year-round, calve on their own, and rarely require intervention. Historical records from families who raised piney woods cattle show animals kept in open woods for generations, with minimal losses and steady calf crops. Even during droughts, these animals survive by shifting their diet to whatever the forest provides. When modern ranchers talk about inputs, they are usually counting feed bills, vet visits, and labor. For piney woods, those costs are nearly invisible. The breed's physical adaptations, small size, heat tolerance, tough hooves, and flexible diet are the result of centuries of relentless selection. Every trait that remains is one that paid off in survival. These cattle are not just relics of a vanished frontier, they are living proof that nature, given enough time, can engineer an animal perfectly suited to a punishing environment. The piney woods cow is a lesson in efficiency, turning the least promising land into steady, reliable production. Her body tells the story, built not for show, but for the long haul through seasons of flood, drought, and relentless heat. A piney woods cow in summer carries barely a tick, even when standing knee-deep in brush that would leave a Hereford crawling with parasites. Veterinarians who have worked both breeds in the same pastures see the difference in real time. In controlled field trials, piney woods cows are released onto tick-infested paddocks alongside commercial breeds. After just a week, the contrast is plain. Herefords and Angus come in with dozens of engorged ticks clinging to their ears, bellies, and tails. Some animals are so infested their coats are matted and their eyes dulled with anemia. The piney woods, by comparison, are nearly spotless. A veterinarian with 20 years of large animal practice in southern Mississippi describes the process. You run your hand down the back of a piney woods cow and you might find a tick or two behind the ear, but that is it. On an Angus, you fill a glove with them. The secret lies in the cow's hide. Piney woods cattle have a dense, oily skin that acts as a natural barrier. While the exact chemistry remains a subject for future lab work, ranchers and veterinarians agree the effect is visible. Ticks struggle to latch on, and when they do, the cow's immune system responds aggressively. Blood tests show piney woods maintain higher packed cell volumes and hemoglobin levels, even in heavy parasite seasons. Where a Hereford's blood work shows the telltale signs of tick-borne anemia, low red cell counts, and listless behavior, a piney woods cow stays robust and alert. Field notes from a 2012 demonstration in Alabama record a piney woods heifer with just 4 engorged ticks after 2 weeks in a high-pressure pasture, while the Hereford beside her carried more than 50 and required treatment for blood loss. This resistance is not limited to ticks. For centuries, screwworms were the terror of southern cattle. Any open wound could become a death sentence as larvae burrowed into flesh and infection followed. Most breeds needed constant monitoring and frequent veterinarian visits to survive. Piney woods herds, left to fend for themselves, not only survived, but thrived. The cows' strong maternal instincts meant calves were licked clean, wounds stayed free of infection, and the herd as a whole remained healthy without human intervention. Oral histories from families in Pearl River County, Mississippi, describe entire decades where veterinary bills were virtually non-existent. One veterinarian reviewing records from a piney woods breeder spanning 30 years found that the only interventions required were for injuries from fencing or rare birthing complications, not a single documented case of parasite-induced illness. Modern researchers, searching for the genetic basis of this immunity, have pointed to the breed's high variability in immune response genes, a legacy of centuries of natural selection. Unlike commercial cattle, which have been bred for uniformity and rapid growth, Piney Woods cows retain a wide range of immune defenses. This diversity makes them less vulnerable to the waves of new pests and diseases that sweep through southern pastures every year. It also means that, in an era of rising drug resistance among parasites, Piney Woods herds remain largely untouched by the problems that drive up costs for every other breed. For the small farmer, this translates into real savings. Dewormers, pour-ons, and vaccines are costly and losing effectiveness. In Piney Woods, the only treatment is letting the cows do what they have always done: graze, calve, and raise their young with little need for human help. The empirical edge is clear on the ground and in the veterinarian's ledger. Where others see a constant battle against parasites, Piney Woods breeders see a breed that has long since won the war. In 1906, the U.S. Department of Agriculture launched a campaign that would sweep across the South like a storm. The enemy was the cattle fever tick, a blood-sucking parasite that carried Texas fever and drained millions from the livestock industry every year. The government's solution was absolute. Every cow in the quarantine zone had to be driven through a vat of arsenic-laced water every 2 weeks. The schedule was strict: miss a dip, and the tick could rebound. For commercial herds behind fences, the system worked. But for the Piney Woods cattle, still roaming the tangled woods and swamps, the order was impossible to follow. Tick riders, federal agents on horseback, became a fixture in southern counties. Their job was to patrol the back roads in pine forests, counting cattle, checking brands, and making sure every animal passed through the vats on schedule. In the official reports, the language is clinical. Non-compliant herds were subject to quarantine or destruction. But the reality on the ground was messy and often violent. Many farmers hid their cattle deep in the woods, out of reach. Others drove their herds across county lines or into the swamps, hoping the agents would give up the chase. In places where the law pressed hardest, resistance flared. Newspaper clippings from rural Florida and Mississippi tell of dipping vats dynamited in the night, concrete walls blasted apart by men who saw the mandate as an assault on their way of life. Arrests followed, but the sabotage continued for years. The government's patience wore thin. Tick riders were authorized to shoot any cow found outside the dipping schedule. They carried rifles and pistols, and they used them. Tens of thousands of cattle, many of them Piney Woods, were shot or rounded up for slaughter. In some counties, the loss was so severe that entire family herds disappeared. The U.S. Department of Agriculture archives record the numbers. In certain years, more cattle were killed for non-compliance than were lost to the tick itself. The logic was bureaucratic: eradicate the host and the parasite will follow. But for the families who depended on free-range cattle for milk, meat, and cash, the cost was ruinous. Eyewitness accounts from the period describe the fear and anger that swept through rural communities. One Mississippi farmer wrote to his county agent that they come with guns and they don't care whose cow it is. Oral histories collected decades later recall the echo of gunfire in the woods, the smell of burned vats, and the empty pastures where herds once grazed. The Piney Woods cow, already rare, became a ghost. In the years that followed, the open-range system collapsed. The zero-input, zero-vet bill economy that had sustained poor families for generations was gone, replaced by fenced pastures and government oversight. The breed itself teetered on the edge of extinction, its survival left to a handful of stubborn families who refused to let go of the old bloodlines. The scars of the dipping vat war would linger for generations, etched into the memory of the southern countryside. 3 family names quietly kept the Piney Woods alive while the rest of the world moved on. In the wake of the dipping vat war and the spread of crossbreeding, most herds vanished or were diluted beyond recognition. But in out-of-the-way corners of Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama, a handful of families held on. Their reasons were as much about pride and stubbornness as about profit. These were not wealthy ranchers or university breeders. They were smallholders, people who saw no reason to change what had always worked. The Holt family of Georgia stands out for their unwavering commitment. For more than 100 years, they refused to introduce outside blood. Their herd, a sea of roan coats and sharp eyes, became a living archive. Oral histories from the Holts describe a deep sense of responsibility. Each spring, cows calved in the woods with no help. Each fall, the family walked the fence lines, counting survivors, branding calves, and culling only the animals that failed to produce year after year. The Holt records, still kept in spiral-bound ledgers, show a lineage that traces back to the days before tick eradication and before the state fair prizes went to anything but piney woods. The Conway strain, with roots in both Mississippi and Alabama, took a different path but arrived at the same result. Their cattle grew slightly larger over time, with many sporting a dun or light brown color. The Conways worked timber as much as cattle, and their herds ranged under longleaf pines, eating what the woods provided. Family stories tell of bulls that could break through hurricane-downed trees and cows that raised calves on nothing but acorns and moss. The Conways rarely sold breeding stock to outsiders. Instead, their focus was on keeping a herd that could thrive with minimal care, year after year, through heat, flood, and drought. In southern Mississippi, the Barnes family built their herd on a simple rule: only the cows that dropped a calf every year stayed. Since 1910, the Barnes kept meticulous records, culling any cow that missed a season and using only pure piney woods bulls. Their cattle came in a patchwork of colors, with horns that swept out wide. The Barnes approach was practical, even ruthless, but it worked. By the 1950s, their herd was one of the last in the state to remain genetically distinct. None of these families set out to be conservationists. Their choices were shaped by necessity, isolation, and a belief in the value of what they had. They did not swap cows with neighbors, did not chase the latest trends, and did not apologize for being out of step with the times. Without knowing it, they created a genetic arc. Each strain was a separate branch of the Piney Woods family tree. Today, those herds provide a living resource for anyone looking to rebuild or restore the breed. Their cows are not carbon copies. Each carries a unique mix of traits honed by decades of survival in a specific patch of southern ground. The result is a diversity that modern cattle science can only envy. A reservoir of resilience tucked away in family pastures, waiting for a world that finally realizes what it nearly lost. A Piney Woods cow can turn pine needles and Spanish moss into rich milk and deep red beef. But that is not what most packing plants want. Meat scientists who have run lab tests on Piney Woods beef point to high mineral content and a grainy texture, evidence of an animal that moves constantly, not one that stands in a feedlot. The flavor is dense and complex, with less fat marbled through the muscle. The fat that is present tests high in butterfat, closer to a Jersey than a Holstein. For families who kept Piney Woods, this meant milk that could be churned into golden butter, even when the cows grazed on brush and leaves. But the advantages in the kitchen do not translate to the industrial marketplace. The average Piney Woods carcass weighs in at 800 pounds, fully 1/3 smaller than the 1,200-pound standard set by modern beef plants. Automated skinning and boning machines are calibrated for larger frames. When a Piney Woods comes down the line, the machinery stumbles, leaving too much meat on the bone or damaging the hide. One small processor in southern Mississippi explains that running Piney Woods through a commercial line slows production by up to 30%. The extra labor can add $50 to $100 per head, erasing any profit for a plant that depends on speed and uniformity. The same mismatch affects the milk. While Piney Woods cows produce rich, high butterfat milk, the volume is too low for commercial dairies used to Holsteins pumping out gallons a day. For the big companies, it is just not worth the trouble. The result is a breed with exceptional qualities that rarely makes it to supermarket shelves. Instead, Piney Woods beef and milk find their way to farmers markets, specialty butchers, and home kitchens, places where flavor and history matter more than sheer volume. For the mainstream market, the Piney Woods cow remains invisible, not because of what she lacks, but because she does not fit the machines built for something else. Pine plantations in the deep south stretch for miles, rows of loblolly and longleaf pine shading a tangled understory. For decades, that brush was a headache for landowners, a fire hazard in dry seasons, and a money drain the rest of the year. But on a timber tract outside Laurel, Mississippi, a forester and a cattleman walk the fence line, watching Piney Woods cows slip through the shadows. These cattle do not just survive here, they are working, grazing down the thick underbrush that chokes young pines and feeds wildfires. In this silvopasture system, the cows act as living mowers. They eat what most breeds ignore: blackberry thickets, greenbrier, even sapling sweet gum. Every mouthful reduces the fuel load, lowering wildfire risk and saving on mechanical clearing. Extension agents tracking these projects report up to a 60% drop in underbrush density after 2 grazing seasons. Insurance companies have started to notice, offering lower premiums on timberland where fire risk drops. The economic math is hard to ignore. Piney Woods cattle require half the supplemental feed of Angus or Hereford, sometimes less. Vet bills are a fraction of the norm. One Mississippi operator keeps records showing annual costs per head as low as $70 compared to the $200 average for commercial breeds. That means more profit from every acre, with beef as a bonus to the timber check. Unlike other cattle, Piney Woods do not stand in the pond or crowd the fence for shade. Even in the hottest part of July, they are working the woods. Their presence fertilizes the soil, boosts pine growth, and creates a landscape where both trees and cattle thrive. For landowners, it is a model that pays twice: safer forests and a steady stream of calves, all with almost no outside inputs. Regional climate models for the southeastern United States point to summers that are hotter, longer, and more unpredictable than anything seen in the last century. By 2050, projections show average temperatures rising by 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity and pest pressure increasing alongside the heat. In this environment, the cost of keeping traditional breeds like Angus or Hereford on pasture is climbing fast. Ranchers are already reporting higher bills for feed, water, and parasite control as ticks and biting flies move northward and multiply in longer, warm seasons. For many, the math is changing. Each year it takes more chemicals, more labor, and more expensive infrastructure, fans, shade structures, even cooling ponds, just to keep conventional cattle alive, let alone productive. The Piney Woods cow stands apart as a kind of biological insurance policy. Her small frame and heat-shedding physiology mean she grazes when others are panting in the shade. Her immune system, honed by centuries of natural selection, shrugs off the parasites that force other herds into a cycle of drugs and vet visits. On a cost curve, the difference is stark. In side-by-side operations, annual per-head expenses for Piney Woods cattle can be less than half those for Angus, especially when factoring in vet bills and supplemental feed. As one conservation advocate puts it, if you want a cow that will give you a calf every year, on land nobody else wants, with almost no outside help, you're looking at her. For landowners and small farmers facing a future shaped by climate extremes, Piney Woods cattle offer not just nostalgia, but a practical, proven hedge against rising costs and environmental uncertainty. The breed story is a reminder that resilience isn't just about surviving the past. It is about being ready for what comes next. Today, fewer than 2,000 Piney Woods cattle remain, a living archive of resilience in a world chasing efficiency at any cost. As climate volatility and rising input prices threaten industrial agriculture, their DNA holds solutions we may soon need. The future of livestock is not just about more, it is about survival, adaptation, and what we choose to value. Sometimes the answer to tomorrow's crisis is chewing quietly in the shadows. What would you save if you knew what was at stake?